Good evening. The winter session of Parliament was an eventful one. The first week saw the House get adjourned every single day over the issue of FDI and multi-brand retail. Sanity, however, prevailed or was restored after the House discussed it and the government won the vote on FDI. Petty politicking aside, the winter session saw the government push through some important reform-oriented legislations. Apart from FDI and multi-brand retail, the government managed to pass two other important bills, the extremely crucial Money Laundering Bill and the Banking Regulation Act. The Prevention of Money Laundering Amendment Bill was passed by the Rajya Sabha by voice vote after the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram emphasized the need for continuously amending the law to meet new challenges. The bill passed by the Lok Sabha last month seeks to remove existing limit of Rs 5 lakh as fine under the Act. The government says the bill will help in checking money laundering and especially funding for terrorist operations. The bill seeks to enlarge definition of offence of money laundering to include activities like concealment, acquisition, possession and the use of proceeds of crime as criminal activities. The lower house of parliament also cleared the Banking Laws Amendment Bill 2011 after the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram agreed to drop the contentious proposals on allowing banks to indulge in futures trading. He also clarified that status quo would be maintained on the existing jurisdictions of the Reserve Bank of India and the Competition Commission of India over the banking sector. Changes to the bill will pave the way for the RBI to issue new banking licenses. The RBI has been insisting that before applications are invited for bank licenses, the amended law should be in place, giving it powers to supersede boards of the banks in the event of any irregularities. As the bill has provisions for increasing voting rights of investors in private banks to 26% from 10% at present, it is expected to bring more foreign investment in the banking sector. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on The Big Picture, we discuss the likely effects of these legislations on the economy as a whole and also what is likely or should come next. On the show tonight is Soma Banerjee, National Policy Editor of the Economic Times, Pinaki Chakraborty from the NIPFP, and Professor Krishna Kumar, who teaches economics in Delhi University. I welcome you all to the show. I'd like to start with Soma, if I could. Before we take these three legislations individually and break them down, Soma, let's look at the big picture. The winter session was, to say the least, highly eventful. Lots of drama, political posturing, unnecessary delays, and even some avoidable scenes inside the House. But at the end of it all, three important legislations have passed, including FDI and multi-brand retail. Does the much talked about policy paralysis tag still stick to the UPA in popular perception?
I don't think. Firstly, it's only because of the legislations. FDI was not a legislation, it was more of a vote and discussion. The other two are important legislation. The banking legislation was very important. I think the policy paralysis picture had started changing much before the winter session started with the government actually kicking in a number of reform measures before the session itself. But what was actually encouraging is with the last session being a complete washout, you actually had little hope, and it started off if the opposition would actually get their heads together and some sanity would prevail over issues which they didn't have much of a difference with, just like the banking bill. Would be happier if they could have introduced the land acquisition bill or some of the other education reform bills, which I think still didn't get through. But I think it was a session well, particularly in relation to what had happened in the last session. And I think this is just more buttress to what was really happening about policy paralysis being meted out.
And there's also some movement on the land acquisition bill. The cabinet has approved.
Exactly. We expect it to be introduced in the next session. They were hopeful of doing it this session itself, but unfortunately didn't go through.
Let me go to Pinaki on the same question. Do you think there is some improvement at least on the policy paralysis bit? Do you think that the government has managed to shake it off as well as they could?
Yeah, I think so, because I'll fully agree with Soma that some of the policy reform measures that were kick-started, that was much before the winter session. I think government was desperate to do that. In fact, that argument about policy paralysis actually was very high in the whole system. So naturally, I think they did. And one of the major things that they did, the 10-point infrastructure programs and things like that. And that way, this vote, which was again a discussion and then a vote, it's not a legislation, and then government winning it, and there are issues related to that. But I think ultimately that issue with a parliament endorsement becomes much more strong. So
right, absolutely. Professor Krishna Kumar, would you like to add something on that particularly? Is the government obviously shaking off the policy paralysis tag, like my guest said, but also do you think they've done enough?
But I really think that though, of course, from the angle of the government, from the viewpoint of the government, this issue is considered to be some sort of tackling of the policy paralysis. But if you look the sort of legislation which is coming in the rest of the world, it's more highly regulatory in nature sort of legislations which are coming in the rest of the world. They're basically trying to rein in not just the banking and financial sectors, but also even other sectors, both in Europe as well as in the United States. And we are, when the rest of the world is turning out to be more regulatory in nature or more reining in nature, I do not know why the government of the country feels that it is because we are not having a liberal regime that capital is not coming.
Right.
Yeah.
You have something to say, Soma?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the banking legislation, while it is true that it's actually sending out signals to the outer world and to the general public that this means you'll have more banks because the RBI will be in a position to give out licenses to more private banks. But if you go to the fine print of the bill, it actually empowers the RBI with many more powers, which actually these corporate sector guys are not used to. I'm sure when the fine print is going to be out, many of the companies who are actually hoping to get a banking license may not think it's a great idea to do so.
Right.
So while I agree completely that it's time to actually be more careful about banking particularly, I think it's a good thing that we're allowing more competition with more private banks coming in, although there should be a caution on
We'll
what
get
really
to
is
the banks
happening.
in just a bit. I want to tackle FDI in retail first. It's in black and white now. The global biggies are happy. The Walmarts of the world are happy. Even Indian retailers like the Bhartis of the world, the Future Groups, the Pantaloons of the world are sitting pretty. The government has sort of robbed the opposition of a win in that particular case. How much should we really expect from that? Well, I'll come to Soma first. It's a well-stated and well-known fact that the benefits of FDI and multi-brand in retail are not going to be visible overnight. It's going to take some time. But my question is, will it really benefit the farmers, especially small farmers? Will it have that much of an impact really on cold storage technology, et cetera, et cetera?
But I personally am very convinced about the need to bring in more investments into the sector, whether foreign or private. It's true that a lot of, we are one of the highest countries where actually food, or rather vegetable and fruits are wasted, and therefore it's a good measure, whether it is private investments, foreign investments, or government investment. Now, as you rightly said, this is something which will only pan out over maybe next 4 or 5 years. I mean, you need the next government which is going to really get the benefits of this. Whether it's going to really go down to farmers or not is again depending on what models they adopt. We have seen both sides of the story internationally. We have seen some cases where farmers have really benefited and some where they've been avoided. So I think it depends on the market. It depends on how the country pans out, on how state governments play a role. I think it's a very crucial thing, as we all know that this is not possible in any state till the state wants it.
Absolutely.
And I think more importantly, it's going to be very difficult if you have states which are, beside each other. So you have a UP which is not allowing, and you have a Delhi which allows. I mean, the Delhi Walmart will need to source its vegetables from UP.
Right.
So I think that's where things will really pan out, and that's where we'll find if really farmers are benefiting or not.
Shoma, we'll take a small break right now. I want to get your views on this as well, but after the break, we'll take a small break right now. We'll come back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to The Big Picture. I'm joined by Soma Banerjee, Pinaki Chakraborty, and Professor Krishna Kumar. Let me come to Pinaki now. You heard what you heard Soma said. There is the finer print that the opposition claims to be the culprit, and the government claims is the same thing as the safeguards that they put in for the little guy. Investments in back-end infra, that is a rider that the government has put. Pricing agreements as well, etc. Do you feel that that they address the concerns of the small retailers? And bear in mind that the decision to implement still rests with the state governments, and in one state government, including a Congress-ruled one, is probably not going to implement it.
Yeah, I think the argument that retail FDI will take care of the agricultural sectoral infrastructure investment is something which I find very disturbing in some sense, because if you look at the public investment in rural development and agriculture, if you take the NREGA out, has been declining steadily since the economic reform. And that is one of the reasons why our agricultural growth has declined. Now, of course, it will formalize market. It has its own benefits. If the retail market gets formalized, probably government will get more tax revenue that government can pump into the agricultural sector and things like that. But if you look at worldwide experience about the retail giants investing in back-end technology and infrastructure. You see, that experience varies across countries, and it probably depends on how do you deal with them. So specific countries, they have taken for a ride. In some countries, the fine print mattered, and they had to really do it. So it would depend on what India has exactly done. And some of the back-end infrastructure that we have talked about, as this has been put in place, if these safeguards are maintained, and actually they do it, probably that will bring in the much-needed investment. But I don't think that only the investment made by the retailers who are going to make business in the retail market is going to solve our problem of agricultural infrastructure or warehousing. I think there is a huge need for public investment so that we don't have the problem of vegetable not coming to the market but and not even picked up from the field. And second issue which actually government has played in its favor is the issue of that we are respecting federalism, we are not imposing it on states. So if you say that some states will introduce, some states won't introduce, in that case what happens to the infrastructure for those states who don't introduce?
Right.
So are we going to increase the inequality in the agricultural infrastructure across states?
So in that sense, are you saying the decision to leave it up to the states was also perhaps one that...
It has its advantage, it has its limitation. Yeah. If we say this is going to help us, and then if we say that if you do, I am not going to introduce everywhere, it's up to you, then if I understand that it actually helps, then somebody who is not doing it actually is going to suffer.
But don't you think that it will be left to state governments to do that? I mean, the onus becomes even more important for those governments who are not going to allow any other investments to come in.
When a state decides not to implement?
No, there are two issues.
So you ought to, then the public spending in those infrastructure will have to go up by the government. It cannot actually keep its farmers or its people away from those infrastructure.
At least the government should not have a feeling that, you know, we have done this open sesame attitude that, you know, the multinational, multi-brand FDI has come and therefore our role is gone off. In fact, the government should continue to have its important role with respect to beefing up public infrastructure, particularly in the back-end infrastructure in the rural areas.
Right.
Remember that the track record of multinational retail giants, to begin with, in Britain, in European Union, there are cases with respect to consumer rights and the dairy farmers of South Africa, different crops which are being produced in Madagascar, Ghana, etc. The track record has not been good. And therefore, if the government has to somehow come to the defense of the consumers as well as the producers at the end, it would only be possible in case it also has systems in place that it would be able to contain any sort of competition policy violations which is being done to or resorted to by these.
Pinaki, you had a point. I stopped you in the middle.
Yeah, the point which I am trying to say is that if agricultural investment is completely left to the private entrepreneurs and those who are going to do retail marketing, I think we are going to create serious problems. So I think there is a parallel, if it comes, it's okay. But the government will have to make sure that the agricultural investment, public investment in agriculture doesn't come down, and more so when all the states are not introducing it. So, and the point which Soma was making, that it will then be more compelling for the states who did not have to have this infrastructure. I don't think that is going to be so easy, because there is a question of livelihood. I know this livelihood issue has to be defined. Would you say that a person who goes with a thela and sells vegetables throughout his life, that's the livelihood we are going to give him? That's not the livelihood that I am talking about. So livelihood crisis will have to be defined what actually it means. Formalization also means that government will have a larger resources to spend for health, education, and better service
I think
quality.
that's a fair point. Soma, at this point, we'll take a departure. We'll take a departure from the FDI and multi-brand retail. We'll look at the other important legislations. This time around, this was a legislation. The banking amendment bill. The money laundering bill we'll take up first. Ostensibly, Soma, I'll come to you first. The bill will help monitor the passage of suspicious money transfers, etc. It has increased the purview of the bill. It will now include concealment, possession, acquisition. The emphasis that Mr. Chidambaram was laid on was on terror funding, but we can also see it as a tool against the generation and the passage of black money, something that was a political hot potato not very long ago. Do you see this as a welcome step, if yet long delayed?
Yeah, I mean, see, this is actually one of the jigsaw puzzles in the entire puzzle that you have built up to prevent generation of more black money. It's one of those legislations, one of the things which will help. And I think when the government talks on corruption and black money, it tries to put forth a series of measures, this being one of them. As is well known now, and I think today they filed the charge sheet against Bharti and the erstwhile Vodafone guys. So as the economy gets more and more complex, we will find also generation of such kind of black money or transaction through these routes becoming even more complex. And therefore, legislations which actually empower people or bodies or regulation to look into these things, I think is always a welcome step, particularly in a country like India, where there is a lot still to be done as far as capping the loopholes in this regard is concerned.
Right. Pinaki, thoughts on the money laundering bill?
Yeah, I think more than terror financing, I think money laundering has to do with the black money.
Although the emphasis the finance minister sought to put on was on terror funding.
Yeah, that's fine. But I think if we are talking about black money, I think we need to know what generates black money. And one of the sectors where black money has been generated in investment, investment is made through black money in a huge scale is the real estate sector.
Right.
And one of the major reasons why you generate so much of black money through real estate is because there is a heavy burden of taxation. I think there is a need for having tax laws more friendly to the real estate sector in the sense that you don't. Suppose I have a house and I want to sell it off. I have to pay a tax of capital gain. But if I am going to buy another house, these are complex laws. So in such a situation, I think it is very important that real estate sector is, when it comes to selling houses, which is not for speculation, will have to be outside the taxes, which is the case in Australia and many of the European countries. If you sell one of your house, you don't have to pay any taxes.
Right.
But if you are doing it for 3 or 4 or 2, then you have to pay the taxes.
Right.
So such reforms in taxes also is required. Commensurate reforms in other sectors will only make it more effective.
Right. Krishna, Kumar on the same?
It should actually be supplemented by certain other steps also in this regard. Because we have tax havens abroad. And tax havens, some of them have got, technically speaking, some quasi-legal sanctity also with respect to our Indian capital markets. We know about how the P notes and so on works. But nonetheless, the effort of the government in this regard should not actually be ending up being misused in the name of picking up people, in the name of terrorism, cornering people belonging to a particular community. This is raised as a serious concern by certain human rights groups. So that should not ultimately be that is an unintended end. It should not happen. But otherwise, money laundering, the step which is being initiated by the government is, of course, by and large, in the best interest of the society.
Yeah, briefly.
I think, just briefly, I just want to add to what Pinaki said. He mentioned the real estate sector because, you need to look at sectors which generate such kind of money. I think political funding is the biggest area where actually black money is generated.
Absolutely.
The moment we go in for reforms of political funding, a lot of that will be solved.
I think it's a very important point, Soma made. We'll take another small break right now. We'll come back and we'll discuss the banking bill that the lower house of the parliament has passed in this particular session. Don't go anywhere. Lots more to come on The Big Picture. Welcome back to The Big Picture. Pinaki, if I would come to you first, the Banking Regulations Act 1949, and this is interesting now. The banking sector will be deeply affected by it, some people feel. Will it shake the status quo or will it be positive? Bank employees are already on strike.
Yeah, that happened in 1991 financial sector reforms also. But I think the public sector bank performance, if you look at, has improved significantly.
Yes.
I think competition helps, and that way this bill is good. And the point that finance minister has made, that we are largely an unbanked country. And there is a huge need of capital to have banking. So I think it is a welcome step to have private players coming in doing banking. And the advantage of India is when the RBI is a very strong regulator. So I don't think we are going to have a crisis. Yeah, always has been. So
Soma, if I could come to you, the issue of increased voting rights to foreign shareholders, it's a tricky one. What are your views on this, on the particular issue?
I think that's only natural and it's to be expected. I mean, if you're going to allow private banks to come in, which are also going to have at some point foreign investments which could come in, you have to give them voting rights. But I'd just like to take the point which Pinaki made, and I think it's very important, the fact that a large part of the country remains unbanked. But more importantly, I think private banks are now realizing that the game actually is in the rural sector. If you listen to the HDFC chairman, I think he made a big story of the next 10 years game plan, which is all going to pan out in the rural area. So therefore, banks which come in will have actually much more to do in the rural area than in the cities. And with, steps being taken based on Athar, cash deliveries, things which are going to really need the banking system to come up and to reach out to people at large, I think it's a very good step. And therefore, competition, more players, all that is a very welcome step.
Krishna Kumar, my question to you is this. How exactly, they've listed out the positives of the banking bill, especially on the rural sector. The rural sector needs to be banked. It's highly unbanked, as Pinaki put it right now. But popular perception in the country is among most sectors of the economy, the banking sector has done really well. It is in the best shape. The outlook on the sector is pretty positive. How badly does the banking sector need new licenses, if at all? Because the RBI has been pushing for this particular law before they start rolling out licenses.
No, but though of course rural outreach has always been a problem. If you compare the performance of the private sector banks vis-a-vis the public sector banks in this regard, the track record of the public sector banks is definitely far better compared to the private sector in this regard. But in this current amendment, what is being also indirectly introduced is that the corporates are now being given a license to run a bank, provided so much of constraint, like how Soma Banerjee just now told, that there are a lot of restrictions that there might be no corporate would enter or dare to enter into this particular pie. It is going to be setting a lot of ceilings that they might not actually think this to be a very profitable venture to enter. But there is also a problem that if the corporates are going to enter into this is almost like at the same time they have a corporate house and they're also a banking house. So at a time when the world is basically thinking that too big to fail sort of a thing has gone off, even biggest of the firms can fail. And the risks are going to get concentrated also. You do not know what the surpluses would actually be. The surpluses of the company is going to be in the bank, and if there are risks associated with the company, there can also be a lot of complexities which might come in this regard. So one has to, because the RBI, like how we have seen, is going through a set of regulatory measures. We hope it does not occur like that. But nonetheless, I'm really skeptical with respect to whether the entry of private banks is going to redress the rural outreach issue. I really think that that task could even now be done better by the existing public sector banks, about which we were really mocking off, and they saved us from the global financial crisis to a very large extent also.
Very briefly, first of all, do you agree with Professor Krishna Kumar? Also, how badly does India need new banking licenses? Like I said, banking sector looks pretty solid right now.
No, you need banking licenses because financial intermediation, if you look at, and the financial inclusion issues, if you look at, it's really, really bad. And I would agree with Krishna Kumar that public sector banks outreach is a lot better in rural areas compared to the private sector. But you have to push them because if you continue to ask the public sector banks by the government that go and bank in rural areas, you will create a situation where the public sector banks will not be able to perform because there is a social cost involved in it when you are putting banks which is not profitable, making profitable business. So in such a situation, the responsibility will have to be shared in a proper regulatory framework, both by the public and the private sector. And from that point of view, I think this is important.
Right. Point taken.
But there have also been certain banks, certain corporates in the private sector without proper licenses, going collecting so much of amount countrywide. I'm not naming any particular firm. But, it is so scandalous that such things can happen even despite some sort of restrictions on the part of the court. So this is a sort of situation with the existing legislation.
Pinaki.
It's not only private. Even LIC can open a bank with this legislation. So that can also be public sector.
I want to come to Soma now. Soma, what's next? What else is needed to spur some growth momentum and get the economy back on track? What is on your wish list?
First and last, infrastructure. Absolutely. I don't think the government has done anything to push infrastructure. If you ask me, I think the NIB is actually, in its current form, as it has been, it's just no good. It's going to be a timeline monitoring body. Today, the Environment Ministry has norms and rules by which time they're supposed to give approvals. They don't give it. How is this body going to help? The Prime Minister is going to be sitting there and actually breathing down the Environment Minister's neck to say that this clearance should come in. What has happened in the road sector? What has happened for coal production? What has happened for power production? What has happened in gas pricing? What has happened in gas exploration? I'm sorry.
So it's a mountain to climb as well.
I think that's the first step that really needs, and I'm not forgetting agriculture, which is also very, very important, and reforms and real stuff happening there. But I think we're stuck with infrastructure and agriculture, and infrastructure being very important to actually propel growth.
Right.
Manufacturing, infrastructure, I'm sorry, the government has not been able to do
Pinaki, Soma thinks infrastructure, America is facing a fiscal cliff. According to Soma, we're facing an infrastructure cliff. What else is needed?
I think we need to introduce GST very soon.
Right.
We need to have a tax which is non-distortionary. GST, introduction of GST can boost growth. There are studies which shows at least by 2 percentage points. Just introduction of a proper GST, which doesn't seem to be moving at all.
GST and DTC perhaps as well. That could, could perhaps shape up as well. Last word, Krishna Kumar, we have to wind up.
Even when I fully agree with Soma Banerjee's argument that you should have a big upscaling of infrastructure, I really think that the government should not retreat from its major role of providing that, because in the name of reduction of fiscal deficit, the government is actually squeezing on capital expenditure. They should actually pump prime the economy. They should actually infuse capital expenditure, and they should try to address it by increasing the tax GDP ratios.
But I think they're trying to do that. It will be unfair to say the government is really not, is trying to squeeze, because I know for sure that there are regular meetings with all public sector companies who are in to see that their capex is actually spent. But the point is, it's the chicken and egg situation. So BHEL will say, I don't have projects. Why do you want me to put in more money?
Right. Absolutely.
I think
absolutely. I think we have to close. We have to end the show on that particular note. I must thank all my guests before I sign off. Krishna Kumar, thank you so much for joining us. Pinaki Chakraborty as well as Soma Banerjee. Infrastructure, says Soma Banerjee. Infrastructure. That's, I think, where I'll leave it at. Athar Khan saying goodbye, and good night, and thank you for watching.